we'll be back from the break. You're still watching Smart Means Business. I'm Andrew Barigi, and definitely with Godwin here. About 2 months, we're going to be taking you through all the way up here. But of course, later on at 9, we shall be having the presidential candidates in Liberia. That is Mac Della Cooper.
Yes, we're looking forward to that.
We're looking forward to that, and of course we shall be navigating that more. But still to remind you that the Marketo is Apple platform, just about
no data, no problem.
Operational, and you can simply participate by dialing *292# and buy bond securities for as low as 15,000 Ugandan shillings. Now, the markets open at exactly 8:15. They will be opening at 8:15. Around all the way to 3:15 p.m. That is East African time. This is effective every Monday up to Friday, apart from the weekends and the public holidays when this market's going to be accessed. But that's not the big deal here. At least you have the rest of the days to make money. Something which personally I believe it's quite key and important when it comes to your financial growth and development. So Zebra this is a reality for you, and regardless where you're located, you can buy this bond securities. And that's why it tells you boldly that it's my money, it's my future. And the Altex East Africa tells you that you need to do something new for yourself. Remember, it is 2023. Well, for now, Smart Means Business. We believe in inspiration, and every morning to kickstart your day as an entrepreneur. Let's get into our inspiration moment for now. Well, of course, it's better to fail in originality than to succeed in imitation. Actually, I know for sure, I love music, but I know musicians that actually sparked off careers out of imitation, but it kind of worked out for them in some sort of a way. Though, at the end of the day, there is lack of that sustainability because you cannot sustain what you imitated. That's the only disadvantage. But you can sustain the original you because it's you. You know how to play around yourself. You know how to put it all together. So that is quite very key. And it's an entrepreneurial instinct in that way because when you're original, you literally have copyright, that natural copyright upon you, despite the fact that somebody might try to imitate you, but they can't be you. You know, that is something also key to look into. And also we had something to do with attending networking events. Like the saying says that your net worth is determined by your network of people. You know, your goodwill is actually your image, your value. I can attach your value to the people you relate with, and I can know actually how worth it is. But anyway, those are quite some of the matters that we need to understand. Well, now heading back into our major discussion here, and we're taking a look at politics and business at the same time. And of course, earlier on, Godwin was taking us through in the morning call about the historical background when it comes to how policies have actually influenced in Uganda's politics for the past, okay, let me say since independence, we got independence. And coming in down, most especially the regimes which were more of significant in terms of policies and business. Idi Amin's regime, or Botte's regime, and now currently President Yoweri Museveni's regime. But of course, each was characterized with sorts of economic policies, and they had an impact when it comes to business running. Because we remember during the 70s when the Asians were I don't want to use a lay term, chased, but they were told to leave the country. And the people that took over, it was a positive policy, but the disadvantage is that the people that took over didn't have the expertise. And we remember that day, Uganda's inflation rate was in negatives, if I have to remember. And now coming in down to Obote's regime, who had the aspect of the devaluing the currency, that means Uganda's exports were made cheaper, and cheaper exports attracted more buyers, and we sold in volume. And now enjoying what we call economies of scale, because you're giving a large scale, and that also in some sort of a way brought in some income to the country. Coming in down to Museveni's regime, which of course has undertaken matters to do with trade liberalization and the aspects of privatization. Yes, privatization and all that. But of course, despite the fact that the regime has actually done whatever it takes when it comes to economic development, of course, it still faces matters to do with corruption, which is quite a huge disease eating it up within. But of course, as an entrepreneur, it's quite important that you understand politics. But of course, don't delve much into it, but have a glimpse of what it is like. Focus on that area. Now, at this particular discussion right now, we want to take a look at what are those policies that are in Uganda today, and an entrepreneur, you at least need to know about them. It's quite key to do that. Now, of course, here are some of the current and the proposed regulations in Uganda that businesses need to be aware of. One of them is the Companies Act of 2012. Now, of course, this act governs the incorporation, registration, and operation of companies in Uganda, and it also requires all companies to register with the Uganda Registration Services Bureau and to file annual returns at the same time, of course, for you to avoid the registration, which happened recently, this very year. Companies that were scrapped off the registration of the URSB. Now, of course, as a business person, you need to understand the Investment Act of 2019. That is key. Now, this act provides a framework for the promotion and protection of foreign investment in Uganda. And of course, it offers a number of incentives to foreign investors, including tax breaks and duty-free imports. Yes, Governor, what do you partake about? Because sometimes people, as entrepreneurs, there is a mindset issue. About understanding policies and getting to understand how directly these policies can actually influence your income.
Right, and understanding policies, also understanding the frameworks within those policies. What are your frameworks, right?
Perfect.
So a lot of people, especially businesses in Uganda, tend to ignore those frameworks, tend to ignore the small policies, or are not invested in knowing what's happening with the policies the government is implementing, right? You talked about the arc of all the way from Amin to Obote to Museveni when he talks about liberalization and privatization of the trade sector, and having a lot of businesses have their own ownership within that space, which is something we had not seen in the previous regimes, of course, with Obote and with Idi Amin. The first interference of government in business was when Idi Amin, I think, went and said, let's get out the Asians and let's put our locals to take over those businesses. And we started to see that start to fail because he came in with almost a naivety. There's a lack of knowingness of how those businesses would operate. And he wasn't able to have the people that know how to come and take these locals. The people that took over were not able to take over these businesses and run them because they didn't have the knowledge, right? So we saw that the government took over, interfered, and that's where we start to see that intersectionality of the policies, the political leaders, and the local government. And then we see there's always that titillating path that we have to keep walking, right? But because a lot of people are frustrated, especially a lot of business owners who might not be in agreement with the policies, who might not be in agreement with the political leaders as well. At the time, people are deliberately fickle So they go out of their way to be like, I want to do this. I don't need this. It's Uganda. I won't do this. So because of those policies are hitting them down, we're seeing how KCCA is breaking down a lot of businesses because a lot of them lack the adequate paperwork that is needed. You talk about the URSB certificate, the trade license, the statement of particulars that is needed for business to be able to run effectively here in Uganda, the TIN certificate. A lot of people aren't paying their taxes because they think they can bypass the policies that are put in place. And because of that bypassing of the policies, because of the naivety and the lack of knowledge, we find the businesses start to struggle. And of course, we talked about one of the prompts we're having here is how can the businesses engage in advocacy and influence these policies? Because as I mentioned, a lot of these businesses aren't unsatisfied with the policies, right? They feel like either the policies are unfair, either they have to pay too much regarding certain policies. So they're wondering, my hands are tied. How can I start to play my role and engage with the government so that they make better policies for us, business owners?
That is actually absolutely true because business and politics either way influences the other. You know, a business can business can actually determine the course of politics from that perspective. And we've seen quite a number of aspects in here as I'm trying to go through my report to see how best we can actually go about this. Well, it's quite very important to understand that we need to navigate such regulations quite effectively. You know, and one of the ways that navigating regulations in Uganda can be a little bit complex and challenging, according to my report here, but there are quite a number of things that businesses can do to make their processes easier, and one of them is seek professional advice.
Interesting. Professional advice. Professional advice in terms of get a good lawyer, first of all. Professional lawyer who's able to advise you on what policies affect you, so that as you're going into business, you're not just going in thinking, oh my God, you need to have all the adequate paperwork. So in case the government policies come knocking at your doorstep, you know exactly what is needed and you are fully equipped. You will be surprised how many businesses in Uganda don't have all their paperwork in order, right? Because they didn't have a proper lawyer to advise them. They didn't pay the actual fees because they didn't think it was important. But you're right. Actual professional advice is something that's very important. But another thing that can be done is obviously building relationships with policymakers. This is something that it has a fine line that we have to walk, especially regarding corruption in Uganda, right? So there's that fine line. So we see building these relationships by attending industry events. By attending these industry events, we're able to see how can I contribute to this person's election, to this event, right?
Yeah.
And you also start to donate to campaigns that are important for these policy leaders, right? By building relationships with policymakers, businesses can develop better understanding of their concerns and priorities, and they can also make their own voices heard. So when you start to befriend a lot of these policymakers, this business is able to tell you, this is what we're struggling with downtown. About downtown, we're struggling with this. They're able to make the business known. One of the reasons why a few political leaders have been creating a lot of buzz is because they're able to appeal to the person downtown and to the actual businesses. It goes to where the bread and butter is actually being made downtown, and these people are able to voice their concerns. He goes down to the park, New Taxi Park, downtown. You're voicing the needs of the business owners. They're telling you what they're struggling with, why they can't agree with the policies now. Hearing the voices of the people is quite important, right? So it's important that if you're frustrated with the policies now, how can you play a pivotal role in making your voices heard? We need to have these communities of these business owners, have that uniform voice, that united front, the person that goes and becomes your mouthpiece in these spaces, right? Making sure that at these events he's attending, these campaigns he's attending, someone is able to fund on behalf of, let's say, the Bataka people or whatever funding this campaign. So the policy leaders are able to factor you in as they come into power. They're able to say, listen, we need to focus in this area. But without making your voices heard, these policy leaders or policy makers are not going to factor you in these changes. But also it's a fine line, Andrew, where as you start to befriend these leaders, they start to take advantage of the fact that you're funding their campaigns, you're giving them money. They'll start to ask for more money. What does that do for the other people that are not able to have those voices, for the marginalized voices, are they able to compete favorably?
That's why we see the aspect of monopolization. I mean, you're given this monopolistic aspect by the authorities, the powers that be, because you know that influence, which is, we know the evils of monopoly, exploitation, definitely, and increase of the prices, because you know nothing can really happen. And evil business practices is one of the key factors in here.
Corruption,
money laundering, because you can do whatever you want, and nobody's going to question how much money are you bringing and all that. Now, there is something here I also see, developing a compliance program. And businesses should develop compliance programs to ensure that they can actually, that they are meeting all their regulatory obligations. And now this program should include procedures for identifying, assessing, and managing risks.
Interesting.
At the same time.
Yes, that's very interesting for people to be able to understand how to manage risk in business and how that will affect them in a very huge way, right? And another big point that I'm also seeing here is educating policymakers about the impact of policies on businesses. A lot of these policymakers aren't business owners. They don't have that knowledge. They don't understand.
Some of them have not actually done business before.
They've not done business before, so they're coming in with that naive mindset of this is what we're going to do, without properly understanding what does the business owner do, what does he go through from start to finish, from inception to fruition. We're seeing here that, of course, the impact of this policy on businesses, right, can provide policymakers with data and research that shows how different policies will affect businesses and their employees. So the information can help policymakers make informed decisions about policies to support, which goes back to your point about seeking professional help.
Professional help.
So asking these professionals, how best can we inform these policymakers? Because a lot of them might not have the know-how on how to be able to inform, how to make their voices heard. So how do you have that professional, seeking that professional help that will act as your mouthpiece, that advocate for you? If you have an advocate for these local businesses, for example, having that advocate that goes and says, speaks to the government and says, this is where we're struggling, this is how your policy is affecting us, this is how we're losing business, this is how we're affected. What can we do? What can the government do to be able to help bolster business and growth? And a lot of policymakers forget that the economy is literally raised by these business owners, business creators. So how they have to be constantly factored in as they're making their policies.
All right. That is quite very key to understand that actually, I mean, as a business person, as an entrepreneur, you need to understand politics to a certain degree that, of course, that involves your given industry that you're operating in. Now, of course, we see specific aspects in here. We have countries around Africa, most especially, for example, in Kenya, when it comes to the private sector, you know, businesses coming in together and they lobby for fair taxations, the levies that are being put in there. That is quite key, you know, because you get to understand once, as a business community, you come as a group and you pass on to your grievances towards the possible authorities, you know, the relevant stakeholders that are responsible to take care of that grievance. Chances are high that you're going to be answered as compared to you being single-handedly, despite the fact that you may have the money, but a voice of a group. We've seen this in Kenya.
Yes,
when it comes to, especially when it comes to lobbying fair taxations.
It's very important, as you mentioned, which is what we talked about, advocacy, right?
Advocacy.
Getting that person that advocates for you, that voice. But now we're finding now more and more, it's much easier to have your voices heard. There's different ways in which this can happen. Of course, through social media campaigns, through emails, the things that you can start to do, through press releases that you can do in a newspaper. You can come together, you get together your employees and employers, business owners together, create that community and have that advocacy. But also now with the internet, we're able to make our voices even louder. You lobby together and say, listen, we're going to send out campaigns to the government, we're going to send out press releases, we're going to send out emails, we're going to have social media campaigns that are done talking about particular policies that you feel are favorable for you, that affect you in some way. So the idea of community works even better when it talks to business and being able to inform policy.
Very true. Actually, I've been looking out for something, and I think I've received it in here. Some of the examples of how businesses have actually successfully engaged in advocacy and influenced policy decisions in some of the countries that are neighboring us. Kenya, as I mentioned, the Kenya Private Sector Alliance successfully lobbied the government to reduce the corporate tax rate. Now, this charge is expected to boost economic growth and create jobs at the same time. Now, of course, we see in Rwanda, the Rwanda Association of Manufacturers worked, that is together with the government, to develop a new industrial policy. Now, this very policy provides a number of incentives to manufacturers, first of all, and including that is a tax break and access to land. Actually, I come to realize that the biggest equation, the biggest issue, the biggest problem, which you will find across all business personnel around Africa or the entire world, is the issue to do with taxes.
Taxes are huge, and there's incredible tax put on businesses without actually thinking about the impact it will have on that particular business and the growth of the business, the how big the business is. There's no thought process to that, right? You can't just blanketly give high taxes on business without thinking about specific examples on how that can affect them, right? So for those that are lobbying for change, especially with policy, these are some of the specific examples of how businesses can engage in advocacy and influence policy decisions, especially in their particular sectors. So we see a company that manufactures renewable energy, for example, and energy products, can advocate for policies that support the development of renewable energy sources. So you have to be able to understand the field in which you are in, the sector in which you are in, and what you can sort of lobby for in that space. So we see a tech company can advocate for policies that promote innovation and project intellectual property rights, especially now with everything being internet, right, with AI systems. We're going to find that a lot of people need their IP protected. If you don't have IP rights, you find that a lot of people, your knowledge is easily taken away. We talked about SMEs just I think 2 weeks ago, you and I, where we talked about a lot of these young innovators almost afraid to innovate enough because they're thinking, who's going to protect my big ideas? What are policies? What policies do I have in place? What policies do I have in place to be able to protect my big ideas, my intellectual property? So these are some of the things tech companies, young startups can start to do to be able to say, we're fighting for this, we're lobbying for our intellectual property protection, so that we're able to properly think and advance and innovate without the worry of our stuff being stolen. Then another thing, of course, a retail company can advocate for policies that make it easier for small businesses to operate and grow.
Absolutely, very true. Exactly 29 minutes past 8. For now, we took a break. And of course, coming up is business in sports and entertainment.